I learned the modes in high school. Bill Westcott, my music teacher, had a theory class going. That's how I learned about all the diatonic modes. And it was impressed upon me that I might want to develop my own opinion about each one of the modes. So how do you do that? You write them out, you memorize the spaces between the notes, the intervals, you try to sing them, you try to memorize them so that when they're coming at you from some other source, some other player, that you can say, hey, that's Lydian dominant, that's major, that's Aeolian, I recognize that. And then the other part is, if you're a player, well then you might want to memorize where those things are in different keys. So I started with pedal point exercises. I'd get a pedal point, in this case E, and I just start to play different modes. After a while, after I memorized where they were, I started to concentrate more on how they blended, which ones sounded good going one to the other, which ones didn't sound good, which ones had common tones. For instance, like major and Lydian, very little difference. So is there a source there for some interesting music? Is it more dramatic if it goes from major to minor? And that's one of those questions that gets answered pretty quickly. So I would just start like this. So I'm starting with Lydian. You can think of it as a major scale with a raised fourth. Then go to Dorian maybe. And maybe Mixolydian, major scale with a flat 7. Maybe Aeolian dominant. So like a minor scale with a major third, you can think of it that way. Lots of different ways to do it. Might go regular minor. Back to major scale. Back to Lydian. To Mixolydian. To Lydian. Maybe do a Dorian again. Phrygian dominant. It's like a Phrygian scale with a major third. And you know, with all of these, I'm not playing too crazy because I'm really trying to take in some melodic information. There is a kind of a harmonic bank that you kind of build up. You know, you're playing a couple of notes in a Phrygian dominant scale. There's a tension there, you know, because I'm ending on a minor 6, so there's waiting for some sort of resolution to happen. And so I'm almost thinking chordally in a little bit of a way, you know. And that's probably where a lot of the work goes in with modes, besides just learning them in 2 and 3 octaves in every key. Eventually you'd want to think, well, what's a Lydian progression? What's a Phrygian dominant progression? So you have to look at the scale. You've got to see what kind of triads get built off of each note in that scale, and then what kind of 2s and 4s and 6s and 7s are available to those chords as well. And eventually you can start to relate to the modes not only as just scales, but as keys, and then eventually they almost become emotional themes, really, because that's, you know, after you get past the musical part, it's more like the emotional impact that the audience receives. They're not thinking intervals, you know, they're feeling the music. There is a kind of psychology of music, let's say, that gets exercised here. Major scale is going to present a brighter, happier sound, right? So you would use that not to project sadness in general, let's say, right? And you would use a minor scale to do just the opposite of that. That's sort of like the conventional wisdom. Of course, we like to play with that a little bit and see if we can play against type there, I think. There are some scales that do that, like the Phrygian dominant. I mean, it's got the happy, but it's also got the sad and the disturbing and a little bit of tension. In a way, you might think that it sort of serves two different parts of the audience that wants to feel up and the one that wants to kind of brood a little bit. So it's got this, you know, brooding is a very interesting kind of a sound altogether. But a lot of that also has to do with what you lean on in a scale. So you take a major scale, and if you're just leaning on these two notes of the major scale, the 4 and the 7, well, it's not all that happy unless you somehow resolve it. And Phrygian dominant also has notes in it that are not very tense, so you could not particularly tense there, because I'm not using those notes that bring out that tension that are part of the Phrygian dominant scale. But you could take a simple riff like this, let's say. It's got a minor 7th and a regular 4 and a 5. But what happens if that was Lydianized? So I'd have to go. And that's one way that you can look at some of these scales and say, well, I've got a riff, and I'm using this particular scale. It's leading me down this particular road. What if I want some sort of a reverse image of this riff, harmonically or emotionally? And that might be the thing to do, where if you've got this sort of, let's say you started with Lydian, you've got a melody that's, you know, major with that little something added in there, that sharp 4. But if you suddenly go, and the melody goes, you've kind of taken your same riff, the same emotional message, but you've sort of tweaked it a little bit just by saying, well, if I've got a riff that's using 1s and 7s and 4s and 5s, what kinds of 7s and 4s am I using here? And just by switching them to major or minor or augmented or straight up, you know, you get sort of a different flavor out of it, and that might suggest to you a different way to improvise. On a more simpler note, when I was doing Always With Me, Always With You, we have that simple progression, 1-4-5 progression. But after doing the melody, I switch it suddenly to minor, and it becomes. And I don't resolve the 5 chord either. So this is a typical way of keeping the message of the song going in the same direction, but we're just taking a left turn on how we explain, let's say, the whole story behind it. We give a different viewpoint.